Hello, I'm Dr. Robert Evans III, founder and CEO of Empowerment Counseling and Training Services. I'm here to give you the first part of a three-part series on new normal discussions. This first video is going to give you some guidance on how to have challenging conversations about race. We're going to give you some steps and we're going to give you some rules to follow. Step number one. The most important aspect to having difficult conversations about race is authenticity. You want to make sure that you can be your absolute authentic self. This is going to require a little bit of work to be done prior to approaching these types of discussions, because obviously you're going to be having a conversation with someone of a different race. So you want to make sure that you can stand firm in your beliefs about your position. So make sure that you're your most authentic self. That is step number one. Step number two, state the facts. This is extremely important. You have to be able to state the facts of the matter. When you're having these types of discussions, if you're unable to state the reality of the situation, then you're going to spend a lot of time just debating the facts of the matter. You'll go back and forth about what really took place rather than moving forward to a solution. Ultimately, these conversations, you want them to end up with solutions. In order to get there, you have to be able to state the facts. For example, the George Floyd case, where we witnessed a man being murdered on camera. It's important to be able to state this man was murdered on camera. Otherwise, we're going to spend a lot of time just going back and forth about the facts of the case. We need to be able to move forward. State the facts. Step number three, ask what's needed. It's really important to determine what the person that you're having a discussion with needs from you at that moment. At that moment, they may only need to vent, or they may need your opinion, or they may be looking for some solutions. And it's your role to ask what's needed. Simply just ask, how can I be of assistance? What do you need at the moment from me? How can I help? These types of questions can help you to gauge whether or not you just need to be silent. It may not be the time to offer your opinion. You may just need to be a listening ear. That's going to save a lot of frustration during these conversations. When you can find out up front, how can you be of best service? Ask what's needed. So now that we've gone over the first three steps, which is to be authentic, to simply be able to state the facts, and to also ask what's needed, we're going to go into step number four, which is the rules of engagement. So we're switching now from steps to rules. It's really important to follow along. Rule number one, active listening. I know this is a term that we frequently hear, but it can be extremely challenging to practice, especially when you're passionate, you're upset, you're frustrated, or if you're having difficult conversations such as these. You want to make sure that you are completely listening to everything that's being said without interruption. You're listening to not just the words, but also the feelings behind the words. You want to be able to put yourself in the person's shoes. In order to do that, you got to take your shoes off. You got to set aside your perspective just for a moment so that you can actually hear what this person is saying and how they feel about it. That's when you know you're actively listening. Also, confirm before you speak about your perspective exactly if the person is finished. So you want to make sure, okay, you know what? Do you have anything else to say on this point? Confirm that. Allow this person to say that they're completely done with their point. And then you would have actively listened to what they had to say. Rule number two. Now that you've actively listened to what the person had to say and you allow them to completely say everything that they had to say about their point, this is the critical piece of the puzzle. You have to validate. That's rule number two. You have to validate exactly where this person is coming from. And validation doesn't mean that you agree. It means that you acknowledge where they are. You put their shoes on for a second. So you're able to just acknowledge how those shoes felt. Because you've heard exactly what they said and how they felt. Now you can validate their position. Again, it does not mean that you agree. It just simply means that you've heard everything that they had to say and you can see where they're coming from. You're able to empathize and put yourself in their shoes. Unless they feel validated, it's going to be tough to move on with the conversation. Validation is the most important piece to these types of conversations. After you've been authentic and after you found out everything that you need to find out about how you can help, when it comes to actually going back and forth and now we want to come to a solution, we can't move unless you validated my position. I can't move unless I validated your position. Rule number 2, validate. Quick segue before we go into rule number 3. It is really important that the person who was doing the active listening to begin with set a really good example for how to be a great listener and also how to be a good validator, because the role is going to reverse and the person that you were having a discussion with has to now do the same thing. They have to also actively listen to you and also validate you before we go into rule number 3. So it's really important that you set the tone and lead by example. Really do not cut them off. Listen to what they have to say. Listen completely. Validate them. And then they do the same. Rule number 3. Determine whether or not you're having an opinion-based conversation versus a solution-based conversation. There's a difference, and you want to make sure that you understand the difference in the discussion before moving forward. If it's an opinion-based conversation, we both can walk away with our opinion. No harm, no foul. If it's a solution-based conversation, we need to determine what action is going to take place once we're done with the conversation. And that's the difference. Make that determination before moving forward. So let's recap. We've given you some steps and we've given you some rules of engagement. Step number 1, authenticity. It's extremely important to be your truest self. Make sure that you are able to just be who you are. Make sure that the person is able to believe what you have to say. And the only way to do that is for you to stand firm in your beliefs. Be authentic. Step number 2, make sure that you are able to state the facts of the matter. Make sure you're able to state just in plain view what took place, because otherwise you're going to be going back and forth about the facts and there will be no progress. Step number 3, ask what's needed. Sometimes you could just be a sounding board or a listening ear. All you have to do maybe is to have your shoulder available for somebody to lean on. You don't always have to have a position or something to say. However, if the person says, I need your opinion, or I really need a solution, or help me out with this, then you're able to interject at that point. And then at that point, you can use the rules of engagement, which is to actively listen. Rule number 1, make sure that you are listening completely all the way through without interruption. You're listening beyond the words for the feelings. Make sure that you're able to empathize and put yourself in that person's shoes. Lead by example. Rule number 2, validate. Make sure that you're able to validate the person's position. You don't have to necessarily agree with what they're saying, but in order to move forward, you're going to have to be able to acknowledge their position. And once you've led by example, they'll be able to do the same. That's really important. Then in rule number 3, you want to determine whether it's an opinion-based discussion versus a solution-based discussion. It's really important because if it's an opinion-based conversation, we can walk away with our own opinions and we can learn how to agree to disagree. We don't have to be upset at the end of the conversation. However, if it's a solution-based conversation, then there's some action that needs to take place. And the key is each person should come to the table with what are they going to contribute? What can you do? What is something that you can make actionable that you can do different that's solution focused? Lead by example in that way as well. And hopefully the person that you're talking to can do the same. So in closing, considering the state of the world and in America and the civil unrest and all of the things that we're going through with politics and just everything that we're going through with COVID-19 and just trying to adjust to this new normal, we're going to have these types of conversations. So hopefully this video just gave you a little bit of insight and a little bit of help in how to approach these discussions. Look forward to the next discussion on how to have difficult conversations with your children about race. Stay tuned. This is Dr. Robert Evans III with Empowerment Counseling and Training Services. For more information on our training services, please visit us at empoweredtoday.net.